You know, autonomous vehicles have come a long way. How long? Well, you're going to be surprised at how long that way is. These things have been around a long time, and that's coming right up. Well, I'm here with Erika Andén, and she knows more about autonomous vehicles than anybody I ever talked to before. Actually, she's a curator of what you're seeing right here. So, Erika, can you give us the short story on autonomy, vehicle autonomy, and where it started perhaps, and where we are now?
Yeah, so surprisingly enough, vehicle autonomy goes back to 1487. Leonardo DaVinci designed a self-propelling cart. It functioned like a wind-up toy, but the autonomous portion of it's kind of interesting. You would be able to put preformed wood blocks into the gear system to program how it would navigate in its path. So it could, I believe it went about 150 feet on one wind, and then it could just navigate. It could only turn right, however, unfortunately. But not so useful, but it was an interesting thought experiment. From there, the next really major key point in autonomy was in the 1920s. It was phantom automobiles were all the rage, and phantom automobiles were radio-controlled cars. And so this was something people were trying in all different configurations, and there was probably the most famous one of these was something called the American Wonder. And it drove down, I believe it was Fifth Avenue in Manhattan, radio-controlled from a follow vehicle. It maybe didn't steer as well as it probably should have, and at the end the driver actually had to take control of the car so that it wouldn't careen off the road and into a fire truck. So, but it was an interesting experiment, and what this led to was the idea that you could use radio controls or electronic impulses to control the car. And so in 1939, GM came to the New York World's Fair with a Futurama exhibit, and as part of the Futurama exhibit, they were actually saying that, you know, within a certain number of years, we'd have automated highway system in the U.S., and this automated highway system would actually take the form of a wire that was embedded in the roadway that would control your car. And this continued, so the development of this continued after the war, and in the 1950s, RCA Labs and GM worked together to build the technology and road test the technology, and actually the Firebird over there in the middle is a concept of this technology. So part of the Firebird, probably the most famous part of the Firebird is that it's a gas turbine car, but it's actually, this Firebird 2 was showing this embedded wire in the roadway technology and how it could be used. And it's there's a fun video that goes along with it that shows that in 1956 when the car came out, they had every reason to believe that by 1976, this automated highway system would be throughout America. Everyone would be driving on this when they drove cross country. This didn't happen, however. And so if we flash forward a little bit, they continued working on this technology, but in the mid-70s, there was a transition that happened. The digital camera was invented in 75, and in 77, we saw the first sensor-driven automated car, and that came out of Japan. And then in 79, there was the first, in the United States, the first time that they were able to drive a self-propelled vehicle through a system of obstructions using cameras. And this was actually a cart that they had built at Stanford University. And so the progression went from there. In the 80s and 90s, they sort of built up this idea. We started adding even more sensors in the OOs. We had the DARPA Grand Challenges that ran throughout the aughts. And the sensor-based autonomy increased. But what's interesting about all this is that idea of the vehicle talking to the infrastructure has never really disappeared, and continues to this day with the V2X ideas and the V2V ideas. So we've actually still been building on that main idea from the 1920s all the way through to today.
Yeah, you know, and I think we've been teased along the way
Yeah.
with things like cruise control as an example.
Yes, cruise control.
And now we have lane recognition and
Yes.
things like that that are automatic braking that we're actually starting to see. So instead of having a wire in the road,
Yeah.
today we're actually seeing some things that are really pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
And I know you've got some stuff from the early electric cars, and as we move down the line and we see the progression of technology, but at the very end of the day, when we took a ride in the autonomous bus that you're looking at right now, and here we see true autonomy, a programmed autonomous vehicle that you can see what's here now. This is not the future, this is here right now. So what's next?
That is a very good question. One could say it's anyone's guess. I mean, I think the ride sharing thing has a good future. But we could end up having to build more sensors. There might be more computer technology needed. But I think at this point, it's test and develop and continue on this road. It's an interesting progression.
That it is. And so I don't know what your interest level is, but as you can see, we're discovering more and more of this stuff all the time.
Yeah.
And stay tuned.